today we're here with Hal Bodner. Hal, I found you through the Horror Writers of America, Horror Writers Association.
Right. Mm-hmm.
But I didn't know much about you. I put out a request saying, I want to get back into horror. That's what I first started writing. Started writing short horror stories. Had a little bit of luck. Got away from it, but I still, when I write a short story, it's generally horror, right, or dystopian horror. And so it's like, this is a good way for me to connect with people, because I've never really connected with other writers.
Right.
It's always been like, I'm doing yoga or jiu-jitsu or something athletic or MMA, and
so you're actually writing with a pen in your arms, under your leg.
Yeah, and when I can actually move, and when I'm not too sore or beat up. So it's it is nice being able to talk with someone that has those same kinds of ideas, and so I want to find out, like, where do you get your ideas, why you're writing, and also just your journey. What I do with fighters, I take it from the start. I try to understand who this person is. So if you're game with that,
sure.
Maybe before we get into that, tell me a little bit about your writing, and how would you describe who you are now? Like, do you identify just as a writer, or is there?
Oh no, I'm in the milieu of writing, I'm pretty narrowly defined.
Mm-hmm.
I'm best known for gay,
mm-hmm.
which is what it was at one point. I was one of the top gay writers in the country. Horror writers, but definitely a horror writer. But at one point. I generally write funny,
mm-hmm.
And that has its pros and its cons, because funny and horror is not, in film it's great,
mm-hmm.
but in prose people are, and there are very few that can do it well. Jeff Strand does it very well. There's a couple of other people. And I am known predominantly, in terms of genre, would be a horror writer, which isn't entirely accurate. I mean, I wrote some romances too. I don't publicize that a lot, but
Now, do these have elements of romance in them? Or is it just straight?
No, it backwards. It goes backwards. The romances that I write always have an element of paranormal in them. They have an element of horror,
mm-hmm.
but the horror generally doesn't have a lot of romance in it. In the Bite Club series of books, which is what put me on the map, there's a very sweet relationship between the two characters who ended. I didn't think when I was writing it they were the main characters, mm-hmm. but they turned out to be the main characters. And it's a gay couple. It's a vampire and his Renfield, his boyfriend. And there's some very sweet stuff between them, but there's no. They've been together for 90 years, so it's not romance.
Oh, okay. Now, when did you start writing? Did you know, like at a young age, were you coming up with stuff, or did you just have a good imagination?
We talked about earlier, I apparently had something published by Highlights magazine when I was about 7. So I'm guessing maybe Kennedy was still present. No, probably not Kennedy. I don't remember it. I don't know about it, and my family's perceptions of things is not always accurate. But that was the first thing. I wrote, for a while. I was a lawyer for years, an entertainment lawyer for years. I wrote a bunch of articles for Theater LA, which became LA Stage Alliance. When I was in high school and college, I wrote for a magazine called Live on Stage. So I always did nonfiction stuff. But the fiction came out of nowhere. I wrote Bite Club because I actually originally wrote Bite Club in the late 80s, that long ago.
And so this is while you were a lawyer? This is So you're an adult at this point?
Oh, yeah. I wrote it in the late 80s. I was rather upset. It's interesting. I did an interview with Brian Keene about a week ago, and one of the things that Brian and I talked about was how, in terms of writing and as a person, the whole AIDS epidemic, the plague
mm-hmm.
years, is one of the most formative things in my life. And in the mid to late 80s, I was upset not only that we were losing so many talented people and so many gifted people, but I thought that the gay community was losing its sense of humor and its sense of fun, because it was all so serious. It had to be. People were dropping dead like flies. So what I did was I wrote this book in an attempt to kind of preserve that madcap, wild, high camp, Cole Porter, Nicanor Charles sort of sense of humor.
Okay.
And what happened was completely unexpected. People my age went, oh yeah, we remember that. And the new kids, who now were in their 40s, thought, oh wow, this is really cool. They thought they discovered something. And it was just, and it's really interesting with this book because it's easy to say I was one of the more popular gay authors in the country. It's easier to say I had a bestseller. It shocks me sometimes when people mention to me how this influenced them, or, oh yeah, I read that. It's kind of cool because you say it, but it doesn't filter down, and that's kind of neat because it was huge. It bought my house. Yeah.
How now did that make you feel like an author? Did you have a hard time saying that you were an author, even just because this was your first book?
Oh yeah. I remember sitting with a playwright that I was friendly with, and she would say to me, "You're a writer." That was the word they used. You're a writer. And I'd say, "No, I'm not." And she said, "What are you doing right now?" Well, I'm sitting in my office. And she said, "What are you doing?" I said, "I'm typing." She said, "You're writing." I said, "Yeah." She said, "Then you're a writer." I said, "Okay." But yeah, it was really. I felt like more of a celebrity than I felt like an author, if that makes any sense, because it did hit so big within the community. And the interesting thing about it was the straight community knew nothing about it.
Right.
Nothing about it. It wasn't until I started getting involved with the horror community, which was the book came out in I wrote it in the late 80s, early 90s. It came out in 04 or something like that. And I started to get involved with the horror community, and then I started feeling like an author. I was at NECON, the Northeast Writers Conference, once, and I was with, it was actually when I first met her, an author and an editor by the name of Tina Jens, who's kind of fallen out of the public eye in recent years. And we were walking across the campus. It's held at a university. And I said to Tina, "Oh my God, I feel like my penis is this big." And she said, "Why?" I said, "Well, there are all these people here. I mean, Peter Straub and Jack Ketchum and all these people that, and people are talking about being published with Cemetery Dance and Rue Morgue and all these short stories. And I've never written a short story in my life. I feel so inferior." And she started to laugh and she said, "Hal, you're a novelist. It's okay." And I was, because I didn't know, I thought you had to do all that stuff. And I skipped that stage.
Now, if you didn't have the success with it, do you think you would have continued? What did you get from writing it?
I mean, I think you're asking two questions. The first question, would I have continued? Probably not. I wrote it for myself. I stuck it in a drawer. It was originally supposed to be published, and I cannot remember the name of the first publisher. It's Halzheimer's, as we call it, instead of Alzheimer. They paid me. It was a very small gay press. They were going to publish it, and they went bankrupt. So I actually got to keep the money, and the book never came out. And then my editor, years later, the woman who became my editor, I happened to meet her, and she recognized my name. I don't know how. And she said, "Oh, didn't you write Vamp Until Ready," which is the original title? Okay. And I said, "Yeah." And she said, well, I was amazed. I said, "How did you know that?" She said, "Well, I'm an editor with Allison Books. I'm the editor-in-chief." And I said, "Oh, okay." And she said, "Whatever happened with that?" And I said, "Well, the company went under. They never published it." She said, "Do you have a manuscript?" So I didn't even know where it was. And I found it literally in a bottom drawer. And I gave it to her, and like 3 weeks later, she came in waving a check and said, "We would like this." And I said, "Wow, that was cool." But had that not happened, I don't know that I would have written. I don't know that I would have done anything with this if she hadn't come in and said, "We want this."
Now, you said straight people weren't really hearing about this, right?
Straight middle-aged women who later, 10 years later, would be the paranormal romance set. These women that devour all of these the Charlaine Harris books, and they were a huge fan of my stuff. Really? Because it was naughty without being dirty. Okay. But the general straight community didn't even know I existed. Okay. I didn't have the broad appeal that Armistead Maupin had, or David Sedaris had. Chris Rice wasn't around yet. But I was kind of in the position of John Morgan Wilson, where I was appealing to a niche audience. Yeah.
Yeah, because I know the first time I bought a gay book.
Right. Lusty Lads and Lassie.
I was I was super hesitant. I was scared kind of to read it. I was like, oh. I told my wife, I'm like, hey, this is research. I'm about to go do a seminar with this author, Tom Spanbauer. But I think that was a big factor in starting to change my views on homosexuality. And he was like, I wrote an article on it, Confessions of a Homophobe. It was like, I was a homophobe.
Yeah.
And I was able to see it at that point. I was like, okay, I grew up Catholic. I was like, oh yeah, homosexuality is dirty. It's wrong. It's like they're going to hell.
It's interesting. It's the flip side. Now, I have a good friend, and it pains me that this happened, but it did, especially all these social justice warriors. I have a good friend who I believe was in your position at one time. And he has gone the opposite, and he is one of these, flag waving social justice, and I mean, you can't even mention that this table is a certain color or it's racist. And I'm fairly conservative. I'm openly gay. Somebody once said, "Oh, Hal, you don't have any problem being gay. You have a problem functioning in the straight world," which is true. And I suspect, and this guy doesn't speak to me anymore, because we have differing opinions. So I think that nowadays the wheels turned in the other direction.
No, and that's nice. But I still, I know so many people, and I think being in the MMA community, very aggressive, male-dominated. Community and in locker rooms and everything else. It's like you still see all the...
There's a lot of gay people in MMA that you don't know about. Well, you may know about them, but nobody talks about it.
There are quite a few. Amanda Nunes, she's the first openly gay champion. She just won this past weekend. So I know some females, but I haven't had.
It's always easier for females in sports than it is for men in sports.
Yeah,
because of the whole macho thing. But I got to tell you something. I dated, and not only do I know, I've known some gay men that I'd rather face off physically against 5 straight guys than they're amazing.
Awesome. But yeah, so that did being able to, and that's what's awesome about reading. Something I hadn't done for a while. I'm just starting to get back into it, but it was reading his book, and I was able to say, I was like, well, it's just love. It's love.
What's the title of the book?
I think I read 4 of his. Faraway Places was the first one. You would probably really enjoy the one he wrote. It was in New York when the AIDS epidemic hit.
Right.
That was powerful.
It's odd that I don't know him. When did he start writing?
He's been writing for a while, but he's been up in Oregon. I think it's usually small press.
I'll have to look him up.
Yeah, because he's amazing. His writing is amazing. It's not horror, and so that was another reason why I didn't want to read him at first. I was like, well,
right.
I don't want to just but yeah, so it was cool. And then I went to Esalen up the coast for a week-long retreat, and that was hard for me to do. But it was him and his partner that taught this class, and we were there every day, and it was incredible as far as like what it did for me as a writer, what it did for me like emotionally. Had some great breakthroughs with writing, emotional breakthroughs.
Right.
But then I got to see too. I was like, that was my first time being around, a couple, and I got to see. It's like, well, they function and love each other way more than the other people in my life that I've seen.
I get teased now. I have more of a problem because my husband is 21 years younger than I am. And I was never into younger guys. It just happened. So of course, when people met him, they were, especially in the horror community, because we do tend to, each other.
Yeah,
it's all with good fun. But when a lot of people met Gene, they were like, "Oh, okay, you met him in kindergarten, his kindergarten,
Now, what was your experience like? Was it easy to be open? Like
in the horror industry, not at all.
Really?
I have only in my life, aside from the scattered guy driving by in a car and yelling fag or throwing something, I've only really experienced institutionalized homophobia twice in 2 areas of my life. I used to fence for real, no question. In the fencing community, this is back in the 80s. There was legitimate homophobia. There was discomfort. There was this kind of,
Yeah.
And then, of course, how many years later, one of the top fencers in the world came out of the closet as gay.
Oh, really?
But it was very, very strange. And in publishing, publishers were... Bike Club came out, sold incredibly well. Kept my publisher going for a year.
Wow.
Actually, it really was really good. And then when the sequel, which is The Trouble with Harry, which is this one, when that was up for grabs, because by that time I had left Allison, there were problems over there, people would say, we love it. And even with the sales figures on this book, they would say, but we're afraid we won't find an audience for it. And I would go, you found an audience for it? It's here. And they were afraid. And nobody would admit that they were afraid. The editors blamed it on the publisher. The publisher blamed it on the marketing department. The marketing department blamed it on some, and it was true homophobia. Not that they were afraid of gay people, but they were afraid that the market was so incredibly limited. And of course that market, we said earlier, exploded into this paranormal romance. And what's interesting is that guy-on-guy romance sells 2 to 1 better than heterosexual romance, which is amazing to me. But women are the audience, right? They love reading about 2 guys.
I'm reading, why do you think that is?
I think it's the same reason that Chippendales was so popular. It was so forbidden for women to be sexual creatures, or with Chippendales to touch.
Right.
That when they were allowed to, when they were given license, it was like, wow, the floodgates open. And I think that's what it is.
Okay.
I also think that, I mean, this may be a stereotype, but I think that there's some truth to it. I think that in certain parts of the country, male-female dynamics are still in the 1950s.
Yeah.
And I think that it enables those readers to get out of, if you've ever seen Tu Wong Fu, Thanks for Everything, the Patrick Swayze film where they're drag queens,
right.
The Stockard Channing character is trapped behind in a stove making spaghetti sauce. And I think that there are women out there like that, and I think that they see the guy-on-guy stuff and the romance. I mean, because they couldn't possibly entertain thoughts of putting themselves in the place of a female heroine, because they've got a husband, and that would be wrong. But 2 guys, I think it's far enough away that that it's easier to deal with, easier to swallow.
And maybe it's, I'm guessing the characters are more, I don't know. I lately I've been dealing with one of the things I've had a hard time with is just being emotionally open, being able to express myself to whether it's my parents, my wife. I'm also with my kids. I've gotten really good with that. I make it a point. But and like my dad never said, never heard that he was loved by his father, and that's just how a lot of men work. Right. And I'm guessing here like women get to see another side, like maybe how they would really want their men. Maybe their men are
it's interesting. I don't write romance anymore, if I don't have to.
Right.
Because there's good money in it. I mean, there's definitely good money in it. Because I write to gay, and by that what I mean is I write culturally gay, and that's not what romance wants. They want 2 men that fall in love, and it's beautiful, and it's sexy. And I tend to be really rooted in the gay culture. I think camp is an art form. I love camp, high camp. Not some guy with a beard running around unless he realizes that he's got the beard and he's intentionally doing it. I'm in the Susan Sontag kind of camp. I love that. Joan Crawford. And you can't put that into a romance. They don't want it. They don't want guys talking like girls in a romance, and that's part of what camp humor is to me. My older brother is constantly on my case. He'll yell, "Pronouns, Hal, pronouns!" Because I used to call everybody she. And now, with the whole transgender movement, with the whole transgender movement, you have to be so careful what pronouns you use. You know?
Yeah.
It's awful. I mean, I'm too old for that.
Mm.
You know?
I'm not sure if it was on your website, because I wanted to, I wanted to see, like, okay, well, who am I going to go talk with? I saw that you were part of his discrimination.
With West Hollywood.
Yeah.
When I was a young little queen, when I was just a princess, I was very, very politically involved. I'm one of the old-time gay rights activists. I did it within. I had a lot of ideological disagreement with how Queer Nation and ACT UP did. I mean, I saw that there was a purpose for what they were doing, and there was a place for them, but it wasn't a good fit for me. And so I ended up working within the systems for change.
Okay.
Openly gay, I never hid, as opposed to, stampeding down the streets, screaming, although I did my fair share of that.
Right.
The AB 101 mini riots that we had here in LA, I mean, I was right in the middle of that. So I got involved with the city of West Hollywood. West Hollywood had just been incorporated in '84. So this would have been like 86 or 87, like 2 years later. We were still feeling ourselves out. And I got involved with something called the Gay and Lesbian Sheriff's Conference Committee. What had happened was, you're California. Do you remember the mess with the LAPD and Rampart? Mm-hmm. Okay, so it was a huge mess. So the Christopher Commission came in and did the whole Christopher Commission report. Well, the county is the sheriff's department, and Judge Colts did the same thing with the county. And one of the things that happened was we had set up a coalition of, I think it was 5 members from gay and lesbian community and 5 sheriffs, including the captain of the station. And we met monthly to work together to deal with gay and lesbian issues. And we actually ended up doing the awareness training in the academy, both of LAPD and the Sheriff's Academy, where we would tell them. And awareness sounds touchy-feely. It really wasn't. It would be things like deputies would be called to a home for domestic disturbance, and they wouldn't understand why the people who had called them turned on them and started screaming at them, "Get out of my house," and got violent. There was a lot of AIDS dementia back then. Never occurred to them what was going on. Why it was easier to control a gay, I don't want to say a riot, but a protest. And not that they were particularly violent, we never were as a community. Why it was easier to maintain order if you were not on horses, as opposed to bringing in the horses. Because back in the 70s, the Gay Pride Parade down Hollywood Boulevard, the parade permit ended at 12:30, and at 12:35 there were LAPD people on horses with batons cleaning up the back of the parade. So there's a cultural memory. So there was a lot of that stuff. And I think we did a lot of good. And one of the things that we did was we actually managed, when they renegotiated the county contracts with all of the contract cities, because the sheriff contracts to provide law enforcement for cities that don't have police departments. We got into the standard contracts that there would be no discrimination language. And this was like 89, 88, so it was really early, and we managed to get that language into every county contract.
Yeah, that's really cool. And because I saw that, I was like, anyone that's going to spend their time doing that much, I was like, that means a lot to you. Now, let's see.
Now, not that it was all long-haired and dry. I mean, that was a long, dry thing. But I will tell you a funny story about that. And if anybody watching is sensitive, maybe they should put on their X-rated filters. We worked for about a year and a half to get a meeting with Sherman Block, who was the sheriff at that point. And I was a little Twinkie boy. I had a little washboard stomach, and I wore the half shirts without the sleeves. And I mean, that's what I did. I went to the gym all the time. And I knew I had to wear a shirt and a tie for this meeting. I knew it. So I got to the meeting about 10, 15 minutes late, and I burst in, and Nancy Greenstein, God love her, was the public safety officer of West Hollywood at the time. And I barge in late, and she's like, "Oh my God, Hal, get dressed, go and get dressed." And they're all sitting around the table. And I, without even thinking, say, "I'm so sorry I'm late. An ex-boyfriend of mine came," the sheriff Sherman Block is right there. And the police, they're all sitting there. I said, an ex-boyfriend of mine is down from San Francisco, and he bought a bunch of anal beads, and they were too big, and we had to return them at the pleasure chest, and we locked the keys in the trunk. I'm so sorry. And then I turn around and I go, hey, Sherm, how are they hanging? And I go out and get dressed. The meeting goes. We do the meeting, right? And Nancy is like freaked out. After the meeting, she grabs me. She slams me up against the wall. She says, what was that about? Hey, Sherm? I said, well, yeah. She said, what do you mean, hey, Sherm? I said, Nancy, we used to spend 4th of July at my friend Peter's place, and his backyard and Sherman Block's backyard were adjacent, and there was a little gate. We'd spend 4th of July with a guy.
Wow.
And she said, why didn't you tell us? I said, it never occurred to me. And they got the meeting, but she was ready to kill me. But he was like, yeah, Hal, yeah, he's a little crazy. I know who he is.
That's cool. Why do you think you started horror? What does it give you? What do you think it gives other people? Like, why are you people?
I started writing vampire fiction, which, if you've ever read Karen Taylor, Karen says that not only do we write horror, we're the redheaded stepchildren of horror. We write vampire horror, which is like the low totem pole. That used to be zombies. Now they got popular. But vampires. So I don't write horror per se, or I didn't write horror per se. I think that most people write horror because I think it's cathartic. I have the discussion about torture porn all the time. I've written a couple pieces. Not a lot. It's not my thing. Monica O'Rourke, who's a very dear friend of mine, is probably the queen of torture porn. Although I think she calls it splatter porn or punk or something like that, yeah. I think it's cathartic. We talk about that a lot. I think that it is. I know a lot of people that say it's just salacious, puerile. I think it serves a purpose. I don't know that it is art the way I consider a lot of things to be art, but it's certainly artistic. But I think that that's a big part of horror.
Now, when you wrote those pieces, were they requested, or was it something you were going through?
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, two. The one piece was actually requested. Somebody hired me to write it, and it was really difficult. And I remember sending it to Monica and going, I think I went too far. She said, no, you didn't go far enough. I'm like, oh, okay. The other one is in this book, which is one of the first romances I wrote in Flesh and Stone. Hold it up to the camera, everybody see. I wrote this book in about 5 days.
Wow.
And it was right after my first husband died. It was very cathartic for me. And there's a real intense S&M scene in it that borders on torture porn. I mean, that was the formula of that particular publisher. You needed between 8 to 10 erotic scenes. You had a certain word limit. You had to have at least one three-way. You had to have at least one, kinky thing. You had to have at least one that was. I mean, they were very specific about what they wanted. And when it came to the kinky one, I got really into it. And I think it was really cathartic.
Now, was that helpful at all, having a formula? Or if you could, would you just do your own, paint your own?
I think in that instance, because I had never written a romance before, it was a godsend. I couldn't have written it by that. Especially since I figured out there needed to be 12 sex scenes given the length. And I said, 12, what comes in 12? And I went, the Zodiac. So I wrote the Zodiac thing. And it was really funny because a lot of people who read it come up to me now and say, oh, and they think I'm into horoscopes and Zodiac. I had to have it up on my wall, what the various, like there's a crab and there's a scorpion and there's not a unicorn, a centaur. I didn't know, I knew so little about it, I didn't even know what was what. I had a big thing on my wall and I just wrote from scene to scene.
That's awesome. Do you have, now with, what are you working on next? Do you also, another question.
Sure.
Do you have a list of all the, a lot of ideas that you want to eventually get done?
You're in your 40s, right?
Yeah.
Wait 10 years and this will happen to you. You get to a point somewhere between 40 and 50 where the clock starts to tick and you realize that you can't put it off any longer. And if you want to do it, you'd better do it fairly soon, you know, because otherwise you're going to be at Forest Lawn.
Yeah.
And yeah, so there's ideas out there. There's a couple of pieces that I have been putting off for years. The third Chris and Troy book, I've been avoiding it, and it's done. It just needs to be massively edited, and I don't want to deal with it. And fortunately, or unfortunately, other stuff keeps coming up. I started writing thrillers for the first time, and they're a hoot. I'm having a blast. You know, I'm writing noir fillers that are kind of painted lavender, and that's a lot of fun.
That's cool. Yeah, no, that's something I struggle with. I have like a 5-book series that I've already done a book and a half, and then I have a trilogy that just came up that I want to write.
You have all the ideas, right?
Yeah, I have all the ideas. Some of them are started. I have 90,000 words that's just been sitting there for a year because I haven't had time to finish it, to give it to an editor. And
it's really hard to get back to it. That's the problem I'm having with Mummy Dearest, which is the third in the Chris and Troy book, is that I originally wrote it 10 years ago. And getting back into that mindset, my agent said to me, well, you know, you can just rewrite it as the person you are now. And no. You know, it was written in a certain, you know, and getting back to that's really tough. And she said, well, you know, maybe your characters develop. Maybe they, and I'm like, no, it doesn't quite work with this, you know. So,
now, how difficult is it to read that work? It's just as far as like the quality of your writing. How much have you progressed as a writer?
I think technically I was always good.
Okay.
I mean, and I know that sounds immodest, but it's really kind of like the fundamental. You know, I mean, I do things that you're not supposed to do deliberately, which is why I get away with them. You have, I'm sure if you went to these writing courses, they say, you know, get rid of your adverbs. You know, get rid of all your adverbs. No. If you know what you're doing, you can use them.
Yeah.
The example that I love to give is people say, go away, he hissed. That's bad writing because you can't hiss, go away. It's got no sibilance in it, right? I mean, you're Voldemort, you can't hiss, go away. And I would play with it. I mean, I wrote a line saying, go away, I'm making something, he hissed, in spite of there not being a single syllable in it. And if you write that and you get it, then your audience gets an idea that this guy is really Nelly, you know? So I think you can do it. So technically, I don't think I do a lot. I mean, you read your first book and you cringe. You know, your early books you cringe because there's always stuff that you would do differently. I'm rewriting, I tend to write long, talk long, write long. I have a piece that was 115,000 words, and they want it down to like 90. So I'm cutting out, 25,000 words? So it's a nice chunk of change. You're tempted to tinker, and you can't. You just got to leave it the way it is, cut what you can cut, and let it go.
Yeah.
You know, because if I were asked to edit this now, I don't think I'd be able to stop tinkering.
Yeah. No, I find that totally true. One of the things that I've definitely been struggling with, I'm hoping you can help me with this, is your writing schedule. And lots of times, I make excuses for myself. I say I'm not able to write until 10 o'clock at night. I have to put the kids down first, you know. But I'm making choices where I'm doing other things instead of writing. So, in order for you to what's your writing schedule? Do you have to write every day? Do you?
I think it varies for individual people. Okay, I think that Jim Moore, James A. Moore, is a friend of mine, and Jim is a big proponent of, and so is Brian Keene. So is Keene. Write every day. I don't know if I agree with that. I've had times when it's been a wasted day because I know I'm just putting out crap. I'm lucky. I don't have to work for a living because I was a lawyer for so many years. I have the luxury of being able to spend all day in front of a keyboard. I try. Stop. Take two. I don't write every day. It's a job, and I don't know that I believe in writer's block. I think that there are some days when you don't feel like going into work. I don't think it's insurance salesman block or school teacher block. I think you just don't feel like going into work. And as a writer, the same thing. There's some days where you just don't feel like working. You don't work. If it goes 2 weeks, you got a problem. But if there's a day where you just don't feel like working, you don't feel like working. So that's the way I do. I tend to work, though, that being said, every day. I'm not always in front of the keyboard, but I'm always working. And then I'll get back to my recommendation for other people. I make my husband crazy. My husband is a saint. I love this man. He's a saint. I'm one of those people. I can write a novel. I've got no problem writing novels. The short story format terrifies me. And of course, like the third short story I'd ever written, I'd written like 10 years ago, and then a friend of mine said, "You owe me a favor," and made me write it. It was Eric Miller. And he said, "You have to write something for this Hell Comes to Hollywood thing." And I'm like, So I wrote this short story, and it was like really my first, I'd written, like I said, others, but and the damn thing's nominated for a Stoker.
Oh, nice.
So of course, everybody wants you to write. And I'm like, no, I can't. And Lisa Morton, who's president of the HWA, she's great. She's very funny. I've run into trouble before with a story that I've got a couple of, and what do I do, and where do I send it? And Lisa says, "I know you're not going to want to hear this, just write them something new." And I'm like, no. But I literally, I'm using literally, there's a gallery, I don't know if you saw upstairs, there's like a little gallery above the stairway with a railing. I will pace up and down doing this for hours, just thinking. Makes him crazy. I get grouchy, I get grumpy. Once the story clicks here, I'm done in 2 days.
Yeah.
But getting to that point can take months. And a lot of times I sit down because I kind of feel, even though I know I don't, I feel like I have to be typing. It is not uncommon for me to throw out 40 to 45,000 words to get a 6,000 word short story.
Wow, that's impressive.
Which is kind of crazy. But it happens. So even when I'm not typing every day, I'm working. We're 3 blocks from Runyon Canyon. I hike up there, and I may not be actively thinking, but it's percolating. But you don't trust it. You're afraid, oh my God, it's never going to happen, it's never going to happen, it's never going to happen. And of course it always does. I just finished something and turned something in that I hate. I think I think I took the wrong approach and everything. But I didn't realize that because it was on a deadline, which makes me crazier. I didn't realize that until after it had been turned in, and I woke up one day and went, oh, wait, that's it. Give me that. And I can't get it back, so it's out there.
Was that the one you just did recently?
It's one of the ones I just did. I've done a couple recently. Oh, no, not the one we were talking about earlier. No. But I think you have to pay attention to the muse, the creative impulse, whether it's by typing 10,000 useless words, or walking in the hills and thinking about it. I think that different people have different things. I know people who go to the HWA meetings religiously who are writers who don't write. I think that for them, eventually you have to put words on a screen. And I think if they were to say to me, what do I do? I would say, write 3,000 words a day. I don't care if it's a shopping list. Somebody else, I have to percolate. And I feel guilty because if I'm not typing, I feel like I'm not really working. You gotta take the time. I don't know how people who have full-time jobs can also write. I am envious. I don't know how they do it. I have to be there.
I used to pick my job so I could write. I worked at a prison, and I would and I would work night shift. So, I'm in charge of 200 inmates, but they're all sleeping, and so I have 8 hours to write. Or sometimes I'd be up in a tower, and same thing with juvenile detention. So luckily, I found jobs where I was able to, or I was bodyguarding. I'd be in someone's house, just there's nothing to do, so I would be able to do it. And so, as long as I have quiet, I was trying to explain that to my son, like.
See, that would make me crazy, because if I'm on a roll and I'm interrupted, I mean, and if something, I mean, you're bodyguarding, but if somebody says something, you've got to devote.
Oh, yeah.
If that would happen to me, I'd be like, what? Go away! You know.
What do you... Now, is it work? I mean, I know it is work, but do you see it like that? I mean, is it a passion? Like, does it fulfill you? I mean, would you be doing anything else?
I had something to say with Bike Club. I had something to say with Harry. I stopped writing for 5 years after that, because I had nothing else I had to say. I got involved with my first husband. The environment of the world changed. A lot of things happened. I felt that maybe I had something else to say. My first husband died. I had a lot to say. And I have been saying it ever since. So, yeah, I think I would. I wish I could paint. Because I think, and I know if anyone's a visual artist, they're going to, like, be really angry. It just seems so much easier to stand in front of an easel and paint than it does to hammer out a 90,000 word or 110,000 word novel.
Yeah. No, I agree. I agree. Now, having something to say, is that also you needing to work out these emotions that you're going through?
In retrospect, yeah. I don't think you know that going in. I don't think you know that going in. Before Hot Tub, which was the one that Eric had me write that was nominated for the Stoker, I had written 2 short pieces. One of them is a fairly well-known piece called Virtuoso that's about a haunted violin. And I had no idea.
Was that in a collection?
It was in Traps. Yeah.
I think I've read that. Okay, awesome.
It's the guy that starts out in France in the 1800s and it goes up to modern day. After I wrote it, somebody said to me, wow, I had no idea you were that religious. And I said, I'm a pagan. I mean, I'm very devout, but I'm a pagan. I wouldn't say I'm religious.
Yeah.
And then I went back and reread it because Joe Miner wanted it for one of the Crystal Lake anthologies and a reprint. And I said, wow, this is really a deeply spiritual piece. And I didn't know that when I wrote it. When I wrote Oink, which is the other piece early piece I wrote, my husband read it and said, wow. He said, you're really misanthropic. You really don't like people, do you? Or you didn't at this time. And I said, oh, yeah, it's pretty anti-people. I didn't know at the time.
But, I mean, and that's also not necessarily you. I've been accused of being a misogynist because of one of my novels. It's like, well, that character is. I was like, and maybe, I was like, I'm pulling it from somewhere, but that
I also think that you also, when in today's world, whenever you have a female victim who's, and if you're writing horror or you're writing thrillers, okay, or mysteries, you need victims.
Yeah.
You have to. It's part of the genre. I think that if you're a male writing and you're writing a female victim who serves no other purpose than to be a victim, I think you run the risk of being accused of being misogynist.
Yeah.
But there's some victims that have no purpose other than to be victims.
Yeah.
They have to. You got to get the serial killer, got to get his body count up. Otherwise, he's not scary.
Do you like making your victims? Do your victims sometimes deserve to die? Do you do that very often, or are they usually innocent?
Do they deserve to die? A lot of what I did in the Chris and Troy, the Bike Club series, was satire. So they were always a specific type that I was criticizing or poking fun at. So on that level, yeah, they weren't always bad people. Right. I mean, in Harry, there's a lovely bit where, and if anybody has read it, it's the guy that tries to fend off the werewolf with some frozen yogurt. It's a really weird little cute scene. He's very sweet. That he gets killed. He's very sweet. He's very nice. But he's the type of person that I kind of have a little bit of disdain for, and you see that, So he wasn't bad,
right?
But yeah, he got what was coming to him.
That's cool. With all of your stuff, is everything on Amazon? Do you have your own website for people to go? And
I have my own
find out more about
website,
you?
but it's not. I don't have my phone with me. Oh yeah, I do have my phone with me. I am a member of the computer age. This is my phone.
Oh,
Okay,
nice.
so I don't do. I have a website that's out there
Yeah.
that I don't update. But all the stuff. I think Crossroads Press has the Kristen Troy novels now.
Okay.
I know that the old Ravenous Romance titles are available. I know Ravenous doesn't have them anymore. I'm not sure who has them, but they're out there.
Okay.
There's the stuff is you have to kind of look for it, but it's there.
And that's what's nice. I was just thinking, I was like, type in his name, and you'll find it. Like that's,
Yeah.
You can find everything online now, which is nice. But I'm the same way as about not wanting to do. Like I force myself to do social media and mess with my website, but I don't do all the things.
I love
you're
doing
supposed
it.
to
I
do.
just don't do it productively.
Right.
You know, I'll argue with somebody about, I'm one of those people that just loves to get in there and watch people yelling about a lion being murdered or some starving child in Orlando, Florida that's been eaten by a hawk. And people are like, oh my God, kill the hawks, save the hawks, kill the hawks, save the... I just love that stuff.
Well, I knew you were gonna. Just reading your Amazon description was enough for me to know like you're a funny writer.
That's true, by the way. I was at the bio. I was
wondering about that.
I was raised. I was delivered. I came out of mom. I was delivered by C. Everett Koop, who became Surgeon General, and I smoked 4 packs a day for 35
Really?
years. Oh yeah,
Wow.
yeah.
Do you worry about that? Have you had a checkup? Like as
Oh,
far
I
as,
have.
like, all
I
that?
have mild CPO,
CPD or
yeah,
whatever.
whatever it was. All that stuff.
Yeah.
But I haven't smoked for 5 years.
That's
He said he doesn't want to be a wealthy widow.
Mhm.
He wants me around, so he got me to stop smoking.
That's awesome.
Which is the toughest thing I've ever done in my life.
Yeah. But you-
And I don't, and I miss it.
Mm.
The writing was a hell of a lot easier with the
Really?
smoke. Oh yeah. Now it's the weight,
Oh,
because you want something to do while you're thinking, and
I eat a lot.
yeah, even if it's just unbuttered popcorn, it's lots of calories.
Yeah.
And I'm Goodyear should be printed on my head, or Hindenburg, because I'm a big guy, and I didn't used to be. I used to be real skinny and tight.
Do you have any desire to get back to that?
Nah.
Rather just
I
enjoy-
hope that the battery doesn't run out during
Yeah.
this, because this is going to be. I spent my formative years as a washboard, abbed, perky nipple, tight butted Twinkie. I mean, I was running around. I would say from the time I was 28 to the time I was 35, I maybe wore a shirt 3 days. I mean, I was one of those, right? The cut off arms and the sides open, and nowadays they look ridiculous. But when you're
Yeah.
built, you can do it. I knew even then, because I never liked the gym. I went religiously, but I didn't like it. Eventually, I would see these larger old queens in the caftans with the cocktails at the poolside.
Yeah.
I knew I was heading there one day,
And
I was okay with that. I was really okay with that,
Yeah.
and I'm getting into that now. I mean, I recently had an eye operation. I can see again, and I wanted like my goal in life was Jaguar print eyeglasses. I'm finally at a range and a waist size where I can do that, and I can play that role. I'm fine with that.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. So with audiobooks, have you ever thought about that?
Either recording them yourself.
I
or?
have had. No, I would never record myself. I have had. I think, like I said, I was never a short fiction writer, but now since Hot Tub, there's stuff out there. Most of that is available on audio.
Okay.
18 Wheels of Horror, which is again big time books by Eric Miller. I've done 2 pieces for Eric. That's audio because it's geared towards truckers. Eric came to me. He said, I need you to write me a trucker horror story. I said, I was in a truck stop once.
Right.
What do I know about truckers? Yeah, when Bike Club came out, somebody came and asked me to do a western. They asked me to do a western. I said, what the fuck do I know about westerns? I said, I was in a Levi and leather bar once, and I flirted with a guy who was wearing a cowboy hat, and that's about as close as I've ever gotten to westerns. So I think they're out there. The novels are not, I don't think, are on audio.
Okay.
I don't think, because Crossroads has the Chris and Troy's now, and I don't think it's David Nail Wilson. I don't think David does audiobooks.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that's something I decided to do with all mine. I tried recording one, and I realized I'm not a
You
not
need
a
a
voice
pro.
actor. Yeah,
Yeah, you
and
need a
then so I threw away all like however many hours of recording we did, and I had him redo it, and that's what I share at the end of each podcast. I think today's chapter 11 of Brightside. But I was gonna say, if you had one, I was like, we could tack it on.
And
to the end.
I don't like the ones that have been done of the stuff of mine that I've heard. I don't think it's a reflection on the people doing it. I just think it's not the voice that I originally envisioned.
Right.
And so that bothers me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, that'd be difficult. One of the hardest things was finding the person that would be right. And I went through ACX, and you can listen to all these auditions,
Right.
give them a little sample. So that was nice. And then I found the one guy, and now I just had him do my third book, and I'm even going to have him do my MMA book just because it's just a nice fit, and everyone seems to like him.
When I did Pursuit, which was in 18 Wheels of Horror, I wrote it very specifically, and I like doing stuff like this. I wanted to write an unreliable narrator, you know that
Yeah.
term, who we realize is unreliable, and then we realize that no, he's absolutely reliable, but for reasons completely different than we thought.
Oh, that's cool.
And I wrote a piece like that, and it's called Pursuit, and it is, I wrote it so that the pace of the prose got faster and faster and faster and faster as the piece went on. And it wasn't read that way, because that's not how you read an audiobook.
Right.
And the guy that did it his name's Grayson. He's very, very good. But it wasn't what I'd heard in my mind. You know?
Okay. But thanks so much for this. I
thank you.
appreciate it.
Thank
It's
you.
just being able to talk to an author, picking your brain,
Which is cool. And
Chapter 11. Day 100, and I'm all alone in my office. I keep staring at Sarah's desk, wondering when she's going to get back. I need to talk sense into her. That's what I was trying to do when Carlos came in. Said the council needed to see her. She asked for what, but he didn't know. Now her desk is empty except for the single red rose, which isn't for Sarah. It's for Rachel. Alex, the little kiss-ass, put it there when I went to the bathroom, just to let me know he wanted her. I'm lucky I wasn't there because I would have cracked. Let him know the truth about Rachel. Alex with his short brown hair perfectly combed like an innocent schoolboy. Don't worry about all those muscles. The smirk that said anything he wanted was his. Like Rachel. Poor Alex has no idea it's never going to happen. I put my headphones on, trying to block out the thoughts. But I keep falling back to when Rachel re-entered my life. The biggest mistake she'd ever make. By day 70, I'd made up my mind, so I stayed away from Danny like Sarah asked. I bought an audiobook, Learning Spanish 1 and 2, to keep my mind busy, keep me focused on something other than the mine shaft as I passed Brightsiders in the square or the halls of work. I looked like a weirdo, repeating, "Cuánto cuesta la carne? Mi encantaría un vaso de agua." And, "Puede que me señale el bar más cercano?" Weirdo was better than everybody knowing the truth. I stayed away from the woods. Had no idea if the cave had been discovered, boarded up, filled with cement, like the one on the eastern edge. But I couldn't risk going up there to look. Not right away. I had to appear like everything was normal. At work, I'd pull up maps of California to chart a course to Mexico, memorize names of cities, the closest airports, the distance to island getaways. I learned all I could about the best places to go, and every time Carlos came around, he was thrilled to see I was taking my job seriously. In Brightside, everyone had to find a purpose, a reason to stay alive. That's what Sharon would always say. And Grace, and Philip, Carlos too. Well, I definitely had my purpose. To get the fuck off this mountain. Every night, I'd train. Started jogging. Did push-ups, sit-ups. Needed to get my body ready for the long trek to Mexico and beyond. I even practiced the hum Dad taught me to clear my head. I realized it was just another version of Sharon's mantra. Dad used to say, "Sometimes you have to make noise to make everything quiet." I hated him for what he'd done, for turning me in. But I finally had a purpose here in Brightside, and no one, especially my father, was going to screw it up. I only allowed my fantasies of beaches and bikinis at night, holed up in my apartment when I knew everyone was asleep. I actually felt sorry for the others, the ones who'd never breathe free air again. I felt awful about Sarah, too. But I'd given her a chance. She just refused. Still, I knew she was right, that Danny wouldn't survive on the outside. He'd end up getting us caught. He was better off here. When I would remember, I'd make him drawings. I'd been putting the good ones into a book, and was planning on leaving it by his door on my way out. Finally, after 2 weeks, on day 85, I decided to visit the cave. Snuck out in the middle of the night. Looked like I was just taking a jog, my normal routine, running around the mountain repeating, "Gracias por el Britis." There wasn't a soul in the square. I ran a few laps to make sure. Then I took off for the trees. Even the calm Spanish woman's voice couldn't tamp my anxiety. My heart thumped against my ribs, and I climbed up the hill, passing the tree with Rachel and Michelle's names scratched out, stepping around the huge tree that had fallen and cracked open the cave. And there it was, perfectly untouched, just the way I left it, every stone in place, not a single crack to see into the cave. Part of me wanted to rip them away, just take down the shaft, but I didn't have my supplies. If the cave had been demolished, I didn't want to get caught with rope, bottles of water, and cans of soup. I ran my finger along one of the rocks, knowing it wouldn't be long. Day 86 would be my last. The next morning, I tried to stay vigilant, focused, but the excitement made everything fizz. I felt like a kid going to school on his birthday, waiting, watching the clock, needing it to move faster so I could go home. Only this time, home was everywhere. Anywhere but Brightside. I put on my headphones and opened the door. War Inside My Head was playing. Just the right song for the number of people on the sidewalks, everyone headed to work. I cranked the iPod as loud as it went and kept walking, not worried about someone stopping me. A question not heard, a question not answered. The music shut everything out. Dad used to hate it. I was 13, and we were in the car when Dad ripped off my headphones and chucked them in the back seat. "You think I want to listen to that crap? It's not crap. You're going to blow out your ears, and mine." I forgot he could hear my quiet rage, the screaming, blasting thoughts. He blew out a long breath of decaf, and he was much calmer when he said, "You really think you need to listen to that stuff?" I hit stop so I didn't waste the batteries. "I like them." Dad grabbed my Walkman, slid out the tape, and held it up so we could read it. "Fear is the mind killer. Funny." It wasn't funny. It was power. It blocked out the rest of the world. 3 men punishing their instruments, their fans, themselves, saying the stuff I wanted to but didn't know how. I didn't bother telling Dad any of that because he wouldn't get it. I held out my hand and said, "Maybe I like noise. Maybe it's better than most of the crap I hear in your head." Dad took the tape, dropped it into his shirt pocket. Real nice. I sounded like a baby when I told him to give it to me, said it was mine. Dad pulled the tape out and looked at me like he wanted to know the truth. Not what I thought he wanted me to say. "Let me ask you something," he said. "You do know what most people think of other people who listen to music." I couldn't lie. Not when Dad looked at me like that. I said, "People are gonna think what they're gonna think. I'd rather not hear it." Dad shook his head. "Who cares what others think of you? Let them think what they want. That's your answer? For now?" Dad handed me the tape and headed down the street. "You're a better man than me." And I was. I never would have turned someone in, especially my own son. Day 86. I tried to keep busy at work, made calls. I even sounded enthusiastic for the first time, because I wasn't selling the customer. I was selling myself. On the Long Island bungalows, the desert resorts. But time wasn't moving fast enough. I kept thinking it was time for lunch, halfway there. But it wasn't even 10. I decided to get something to drink. Headed for the door. Sarah said, "Joe?" "I'm fine." I put on my headphones. "See?" The break room was to my right. A good chance it was empty. This wasn't a place where people hung out by the water cooler, so I opened the door, stepped inside. Carlos finished digging in the fridge and headed toward me, a water bottle in each hand. He was talking, so I had to take off my headphones to ask him what he said. "I've been going over the numbers with Sarah. I think we can crack Canada." "Cool." I pictured myself walking the streets of Montreal. Carlos cocked his eyebrow. Quickly I said, "I can put together a list of territories." "Great." I went over to the cupboard, tempted to grab the dusty can of regular coffee, but I started a fresh batch of decaf. The last thing I needed was having my mind race. There was just no telling how far it would go, what I'd give away. Carlos asked when it would be ready. "End of day." "Great." Thankfully, he left. I felt bad for Sarah, knowing she had to sit in his office every day listening to Carlos wearing out the word, "Great," and yet somehow keeping my secret. I poured my cup, walked out, and nearly spilled it at the sight of Rachel. Her hair was dried out and frizzy. She wore this baggy wool sweater that reminded me of my grandmother's before she was sent to the psych ward. Rachel's eyes were wide and jittery like she'd been electrocuted. Her skin pale, almost gray. Those eyes grew even wider when she saw me. "Joe!" She hurried over and threw her arms around me. More life than when I saw her in the cabin, but still not Rachel. "Thank you for visiting me. The nurse said you were really sweet." "Oh." I noticed everyone in the office starting to gawk at the girl formerly known as Rachel. This shattered creature standing there in that disgusting wool sweater. I brought her to my office, the one that used to be hers. It was a mistake. Rachel started crying, sobbing, then suddenly pulled it together because she knew people were still watching. "Why don't you give us a second, Sarah?" Sarah said sure thing and closed the door behind her. Rachel just stood there, staring at her old desk. She wasn't blinking. I asked her, "When did you get out?" This morning. Yeah." "Well, that's great." We stood there for a few seconds. I couldn't believe how old she looked. Rachel messed with her hair. "I'm getting a new apartment. They're painting it now, so I haven't had a chance to shower." "You look great." Rachel knew I was lying, but she appreciated it. "So," she said, I was thinking maybe we could have dinner tonight?" Tonight? I pushed the thought of the cave out of my head. I'm buried in work. I really don't know how long. The tears spread across her eyes again. She had the image of the cave rattling around her damaged brain. It confused her. She shook her head like she was mad at it. "Screw work," I said. "Dinner sounds perfect. Where do you want to go?" "I was thinking Oscars. You know, like old times." "Oscars it is." Rachel smiled, and it looked like it hurt. "Well, let me get back to work. I'll meet you at 8. She sounded a little more like her old self when she said, "Okay." I couldn't have her near any more. As calmly as I could, I opened the door and smiled. Told her, "I'll see you tonight." Rachel leaned in and put those dry, cracking lips on mine. Sarah came back in after being subjected to Rachel's scowl. I couldn't look at Sarah, not with what was going through her head. She was telling me to look at Rachel, take a really good look, because that's how I was going to end up. I shouldn't have gone out with Rachel that night. I should have blown her off and made my escape. But Rachel deserved better than that. I wasn't the only reason she got sent to the cabin, but I could have stopped it. I could have told her what she needed to hear. I knew the boots were coming, and I just sat there like a coward. If I didn't have the balls to face Rachel and tell her how sorry I was, how could I ever step off the 200-foot drop, stay one step ahead of the dogs and the bullets? Plus, I needed an alibi. I wanted everyone to see me out on a date. My weird late-night jogs were causing people to talk. Some thought I was overcompensating, trying not to lose it. Others thought I already had. Rachel was waiting for me on the bench under the flapping American flag, just like night 38. Only this time, she wasn't in her fancy green dress. She wore a long skirt, a big puffy coat. When she saw me, she wished she'd worn something nicer. I was in the only suit I had in Brightside. "You look nice," Rachel said. "You too." Rachel fidgeted in her coat, looked down at her big, ugly snow boots. "Come on, let's eat," I said. I hadn't meant to take her hand, but there it was. Rachel blushed. She had hope we actually might work out. I hummed in my head to keep out the truth. "What song is that?" she asked. "Oh, just something my dad used to sing." Rachel heard what I wanted to do to him for turning me in, but she didn't say anything, just rubbed my arm as we walked through the square. It felt good. We sat in the back, even though the hostess wanted us up front to make it seem not so empty. "I've never seen it like this," Rachel said. The hostess told us that they'd been bringing in so many new people, everyone's wages had been cut. I worked on commission, so I hadn't thought about it before. But it made sense. There was only so much money to be made on a mountaintop. Rachel looked over the menu, but I knew what she was going to ask before she even said it. She wanted to sound normal, not broken inside. The girl trapped in the cabin swallowing pills to sedate her mind. "Tell me about Sarah." "She's Danny's sister. She came here to be with him. Actually turned herself." "You like her?" "We're just friends." Rachel studied me, her eyes peering over the menu. Nothing's happened. Rachel ducked down behind her menu. "I know." How easy it was to remember all the reasons Rachel and I should never have been together in the first place. She took a drink, steeled herself. "Okay, I just want you to listen." I pulled on my sleeves, wished I'd worn something more comfortable. "All right." I need to apologize, she said, for what happened for us. No, I'm the one who... I said listen. Just listen. Yeah, okay. Sorry. I thought about you a lot. I mean, when I could think. And I understand that I have way too much stuff going on inside. And I know that you didn't always find me attractive, Rachel. And it's okay. I'm not perfect. I didn't want to accept that. It's why I did a lot of the stuff in the past. The list of men spinning in my head like a Rolodex. And you have a lot of stuff, too, which is okay. We have this thing, whatever it is, and it makes life so much more complicated. Sometimes we feel hurt because we know what other people are thinking. Other times we feel superior because no one can ever lie to us. The cave flashed in my mind before I could catch it. Joe, what's going on? Nothing. Keep going. I thought, loud and clear. I want to hear about the cabin. She focused and said, It was really hard at first, like you were strapped to something, only you really didn't care. But it taught me things, to be accepting, open, to realize that Brightside offers us a place to be with our own kind. In the real world, relationships are always one-sided with us. Here, for the first time, we're on equal footing. Sharon's words spewing out of her mouth. I focused on the fork, the starting lineup for the Cleveland Indians. It was teenage sex. Thinking of anything to push it back, delay. Joe, I need you to hear me. Jim Thome on first base. Joe! I'm here. We rushed things, and that's my fault. We really didn't know each other, but I'd like to try. I mean, we have all the time in the world. Time. In 5 hours, I was supposed to be tying the rope. Rachel's first thought was that I was going to hang myself. I've been drawing, I blurted, like a lot, for Danny. And I think I'm getting pretty good. Even faces, which are impossible. Rachel thought about my first drawing, the one of her under the tree, her nose so Jewish. The waitress arrived and I took a breath, happy to have something new to focus on. But when the waitress left, the thoughts started coming in waves. I ate breadsticks, savored every bite, focused on the crunch, the crumbs melting on my tongue. I'd never taken such pleasure in a breadstick, never focused my entire being on a bite. Suddenly, Rachel's foot was rubbing against mine. She'd taken it out of the boot. I felt her stocking sliding up my pant leg. Nylon on flesh. Rachel slowly took a bite of her breadstick, like she was going to make it explode in her mouth. It was weird and a little sexy. Sexy was fine. Meant I didn't have to think about my cave, my escape. I put my hand on her foot, brought it up between my legs. The waitress came back, pretended like she forgot something, and left. Her thoughts calling out, "Why do the perverts always sit in my section?" At some point during the dinner, it started to sleet, and by the time we hit the sidewalk, we could barely keep our balance. The wind howling in the night. I wasn't drunk, but I'd had a glass of wine at Rachel's insistence. Figured it'd give me courage for the long night ahead. But with the ground covered in ice, my escape would have to wait. Climbing down a dry rope was treacherous enough. "Joe, what are you thinking?" Shit. We should get inside. Yeah. The wind was so loud I couldn't hear Rachel's thoughts. Prayed she hadn't heard mine. The sex was odd. First, we're tearing off each other's clothes. The next, I'm underneath her, and Sarah pops into my head. Rachel touched my cheek. I'm sorry, I said. There's nothing to be sorry about. It's natural. Let's just focus on us. The cabin had broken the old Rachel, left this kind-hearted creature behind. I wondered if some time in the cabin was just what I needed. In between licks on my chest, Rachel said, You really don't. Afterwards, we stretched out, caught our breath. Then Rachel got up to pee. 2 steps later, she cried out,
What the hell's all over the floor?
Rachel navigated through the jagged pieces of broken gifts I hadn't fully swept, the pieces to Dad's puzzle. I thought Rachel was out of range, but when she came back, her body haloed by the bathroom light, she said, I want to see it. Rachel, I don't think. Yes, you do. You want to show me. Fucking telepaths. I got up, threw on some underwear because my dick had shriveled like a snail, and there's something not right about holding a shotgun buck naked. I stepped into the closet, reached up to the top shelf where it was hidden behind a bunch of Dad's boxes, all shiny and ready for action. Can I hold it? I knew there weren't any cameras in my room. The boots would have come the night I assembled it. Be careful. It's heavy. Rachel pretended like she was going to drop it, but caught it and laughed. Don't mess around. Why? Scared? Rachel pointed the gun at my chest. I couldn't remember if I'd taken out the shells. That's not funny. Kinda is. She aimed it at my dick. So kind-hearted. So fucking crazy. Just give it to me, I said. Rachel backed me up, and I fell onto the bed. She grinned at me like a child who'd found her Christmas presents. Tell me about the mine, she said. Rachel, shut up. Tell me about the cave. Rachel knew I wasn't going to say shit, not with her pointing the shotgun at me, so she handed it over. I thought about hitting her with it like a baseball bat. In this little girl voice, she said, Please don't hit me, mister. The tension broke into laughter. Truth was, I wanted to tell her. Sarah was the only person who knew, and she thought it was the dumbest thing that had ever clanged around my head. So I silently told Rachel everything. How I'd found it, traveled down the shaft in the dark, seen the drop-off, covered it back up with rocks. We both figured the boots and the council never even knew it was there. It had probably been covered up before we arrived. Rachel sat next to me, and I realized I wanted her to come along. Didn't want to do it alone. I needed someone to help me down the 200 feet, and Rachel used to rock climb. Before I could even ask, Rachel said, Yes,